I was holding my 3-week-old daughter Emma in the sterile corridors of Desert Valley Medical Center when my sister Lisa delivered the words that would haunt me for months. Her voice carried the clinical authority that came with 15 years as a nurse practitioner, but beneath it was something I couldn't quite identify at the time. "Sarah, you need to prepare yourself," she said, her hand resting on my shoulder with practiced compassion. "Emma's heart defect is more severe than we initially thought. The specialists are saying 6 months, maybe less." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as my world collapsed around those words. My newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that according to my sister, she was dying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pregnancy had been difficult from the start, filled with complications that seemed to multiply with each doctor's visit. Michael and I had tried for years to have children, scraping together money for fertility treatments while living paycheck to paycheck in our small Glendale apartment. When we finally conceived Emma, it felt like a miracle, but that joy was quickly overshadowed by a series of concerning ultrasounds and tests. Lisa had been our rock through it all, using her medical connections to get us appointments with specialists, translating complex medical jargon into terms we could understand, and reassuring us that modern medicine could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. Emma was born with what the doctors called a congenital heart defect, a condition that would require surgery but was considered treatable with the right care. At least that's what I thought, until Lisa began painting an increasingly grim picture. She spoke of complications during the delivery that I didn't remember, of test results that showed deteriorating function, of specialists who were losing hope. As a new mother already overwhelmed by the responsibilities of caring for a medically fragile infant, I trusted my sister implicitly. She had the medical training I lacked, the professional relationships that opened doors, and most importantly, she was family. The early weeks of Emma's life became a blur of hospital visits, medications, and mounting medical bills. Michael was working double shifts at construction sites across the state, leaving me to navigate the complex world of pediatric cardiology largely alone. Lisa stepped in to fill that void, accompanying me to appointments, speaking directly with doctors, and managing Emma's care with an efficiency that both impressed and intimidated me. She had a way of taking charge in medical settings that made everyone listen, from nurses to attending physicians. Her presence commanded respect, and I was grateful to have someone so knowledgeable advocating for my daughter. But as the weeks turned into months, something began to feel wrong. Not with Emma, who seemed to be growing and developing normally despite her condition, but with the story I was being told about her prognosis. The doom and gloom that Lisa consistently painted didn't match what I was seeing with my own eyes. Emma was alert, responsive, and hitting developmental milestones that seemed inconsistent with a child who was supposedly dying. When I mentioned this to Lisa, she would patiently explain that cardiac conditions in infants could be deceptive, that children often appeared healthy even as their hearts were failing, that my maternal instincts, while admirable, couldn't override medical reality. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Michael and I had already maxed out our credit cards paying for Emma's initial treatments, and the mounting costs of her ongoing care were pushing us toward bankruptcy. Lisa suggested we look into clinical trials for experimental treatments, programs that might give Emma a fighting chance while reducing our financial burden. She handled all the paperwork, explaining that her medical background made her better equipped to navigate the complex application processes. I signed whatever she put in front of me, desperate to do anything that might save my daughter's life. It was during one of these clinical trial discussions that I first met Dr. Rachel Chen, a pediatric surgeon who had been brought in to consult on Emma's case. Unlike the other doctors I had encountered, Dr. Chen seemed surprised by the severity of the prognosis that had been outlined for Emma. She examined my daughter with gentle thoroughness, asking detailed questions about Emma's daily activities, feeding patterns, and energy levels. Her questions struck me as odd, because they seemed to contradict the narrative of inevitable decline that had been established. When I mentioned this to Lisa afterward, she dismissed Dr. Chen as young and inexperienced, suggesting that more seasoned physicians understood the complexities of Emma's condition better. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a routine follow-up appointment. Lisa had arranged for us to meet with Dr. Wilson, our longtime family physician, who had been coordinating Emma's care. The appointment was scheduled for early morning, and Lisa insisted on picking us up, claiming she wanted to discuss some new treatment options with Dr. Wilson directly. As we sat in the waiting room, I overheard a conversation between two nurses that made my blood run cold. They were discussing a case involving insurance fraud and experimental treatment programs, mentioning payments that had been made to physicians for enrolling patients in unnecessary trials. The details were vague, but something about their tone made me pay closer attention. When Dr. Wilson finally called us in, his demeanor seemed different than usual. He avoided making direct eye contact with me and seemed to defer to Lisa for most of the conversation. As they discussed Emma's treatment plan, I noticed that Lisa was asking very specific questions about documentation and billing procedures, questions that seemed more focused on administrative details than medical outcomes. When I tried to interject with my own concerns about Emma's prognosis, both Lisa and Dr. Wilson seemed to redirect the conversation back to the clinical trial programs that Lisa had been promoting. That afternoon, I called Dr. Chen's office directly, something I had never done without Lisa's involvement. Her receptionist was friendly and accommodating, scheduling an appointment for the following week. When I mentioned that I was Emma Martinez's mother, there was a pause on the other end.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
End of the line. "Oh, you're Emma's mother," the receptionist said. "Dr. Chen has been hoping to speak with you directly. She's had some concerns about the treatment plan that's been outlined for your daughter." The word concerns sent a chill down my spine, but not for the reasons I had grown accustomed to over the past few months. The night before my appointment with Dr. Chen, I couldn't sleep. I found myself sitting in Emma's nursery, watching her breathe as she slept peacefully in her crib. For a child who was supposedly dying, she looked remarkably healthy. Her color was good, her breathing was regular, and she had been gaining weight steadily. I tried to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had been told, but the pieces weren't fitting together anymore. Michael noticed my restlessness when he returned from his latest job site. "Maybe it's time we got a second opinion," he suggested gently. "Not because we don't trust Lisa, but because Emma is our daughter, and we need to know for ourselves." The appointment with Dr. Chen changed everything. She spent over an hour examining Emma, reviewing test results, and asking detailed questions about our experience with other physicians. Her assessment was radically different from everything we had been told. "Emma does have a heart defect," Dr. Chen explained carefully, "but it's much less severe than what's been described to you. With proper surgical intervention, she should live a completely normal life. I'm confused about why you were told her prognosis was so poor." When I explained the timeline of Lisa's involvement and the clinical trials she had enrolled Emma in, Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Chen said, choosing her words carefully, "some of the treatments Emma has been receiving aren't standard for her condition. In fact, some of them might be unnecessary and potentially harmful. I think we need to review her entire medical history very carefully." She pulled out a thick file that contained copies of Emma's medical records from various sources. As she flipped through the pages, her frown deepened. "There are some inconsistencies here that I'd like to investigate further. Would you be willing to give me permission to contact some of these other physicians directly?" The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, medical record requests, and slowly mounting evidence that something was terribly wrong with Emma's care. Chen discovered that several of the test results that had been used to justify Emma's poor prognosis had been misrepresented or taken out of context. More disturbing was the revelation that the clinical trials Emma had been enrolled in were paying significant compensation to the referring physicians, creating financial incentives for enrolling patients regardless of medical necessity. Lisa's name appeared repeatedly in the documentation as the primary contact for Emma's care, despite the fact that she wasn't officially Emma's physician. When I confronted Lisa with Dr. Chen's findings, her response was swift and defensive. She accused Dr. Chen of being inexperienced and suggested that I was being manipulated by a surgeon who wanted to perform unnecessary procedures for financial gain. "Sarah, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment," she said with the same clinical authority she had always wielded. "Emma is sicker than you want to admit, and Dr. Chen is taking advantage of your desperation. Trust me, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what I'm talking about," but her words no longer carried the same weight they once had. I had seen the evidence with my own eyes, and it told a very different story. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Lisa's deception. Working with Dr. Wilson, she had been systematically enrolling vulnerable patients in experimental treatment programs that offered substantial financial incentives to referring medical professionals. Emma's case was particularly valuable because of her age and the complexity of her condition, making her eligible for multiple high-paying clinical trials simultaneously. The treatments themselves weren't necessarily harmful, but they were unnecessary for Emma's actual condition, and were being administered primarily for financial rather than medical reasons. The documentation trail was extensive and damning. Lisa had been falsifying medical records, exaggerating symptoms, and misrepresenting test results to qualify patients for experimental programs. She had established relationships with clinical trial coordinators across the state, creating a network that allowed her to place patients in multiple studies simultaneously. The financial arrangements were sophisticated, involving consulting fees, referral bonuses, and equipment leasing agreements that obscured the true nature of the payments being made. Emma alone had generated over $200,000 in clinical trial fees, money that was split between Lisa, Dr. Wilson, and several other medical professionals who were part of the scheme. The weight of Dr. Chen's revelations pressed down on me like a physical force. As I sat in my car outside the hospital, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat behind me. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone to call Michael, but I couldn't find the words to explain what I had just learned. How do you tell someone that your own sister has been using your dying child as a source of income? How do you process the fact that months of sleepless nights, financial ruin, and emotional torture had been manufactured for profit? Michael answered on the second ring, his voice tired from another 16-hour shift, pouring concrete in the desert heat. How did it go with Dr. Chen? He asked, and I could hear the cautious hope in his voice. We had both been clinging to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Emma's prognosis wasn't as dire as we had been led to believe. Michael, you need to come home, I managed to say through the tears that had started flowing. Emma's going to be okay. More than okay. But there's something else, something terrible that Lisa has been doing. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity before he simply said, I'm on my way. That evening, as we sat at our small kitchen table with Dr. Chen's findings spread out before us, the true magnitude of Lisa's betrayal began to sink in. The medical records told a story of systematic manipulation that went far beyond simple financial fraud. Lisa had been controlling every aspect of Emma's medical care, ensuring that we never spoke directly with specialists, filtering all communication through herself, and gradually isolating us from anyone who might question the narrative she had constructed. She had positioned herself as our advocate and protector while simultaneously exploiting our vulnerability for financial gain. The clinical trials that Emma had been enrolled in were legitimate research studies, but they were designed for children with much more severe conditions than what Emma actually had. By misrepresenting Emma's symptoms and test results, Lisa had qualified her for experimental treatments that carried unnecessary risks and side effects. One of the medications Emma had been receiving was designed for children with advanced heart failure, a condition that Emma simply didn't have. The long-term effects of these unnecessary treatments were still unknown, but Dr. Chen was concerned about potential impacts on Emma's developing cardiovascular system. Michael's reaction was explosive. He paced around our small living room, his work boots leaving dusty prints on the carpet, his hands clenched into fists as he processed what we had learned. She watched us struggle, he said, his voice rising with each word. She watched us go into debt, watched you cry yourself to sleep every night, watched us plan our daughter's funeral, and she knew the whole time that it was all lies. His anger was righteous and pure, but I found myself feeling something different, something colder and more calculating. Lisa had taken advantage of the most vulnerable moment in our lives, and she needed to face consequences for what she had done. The next morning, I called Lisa and asked her to meet me for coffee, keeping my voice as normal as possible, despite the rage burning in my chest. She suggested we meet at the Starbucks near her office in Scottsdale, the same upscale shopping center where she often bragged about spending her lunch breaks, browsing expensive boutiques that Michael and I could never afford. As I drove across town, I thought about all the times Lisa had made comments about our financial situation, subtle suggestions that we needed to be more responsible with money, gentle criticisms of our lifestyle choices. It all took on a different meaning now that I knew she had been profiting from our desperation. Lisa arrived 15 minutes late, as she always did, carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than Michael made in a month. She looked polished and professional in her nurse practitioner uniform, every inch the successful medical professional who had worked her way up from humble beginnings. "How's our little fighter doing?" she asked with practiced concern, the same tone she had used for months to discuss Emma's supposedly terminal condition. I studied her face, looking for any sign of guilt or remorse, but found only the confident expression of someone who believed their deception was still intact. Actually, Lisa, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, I said, pulling out the folder of documents that Dr. Chen had given me. I've been doing some research into Emma's condition, and I've discovered some things that don't add up. I watched her expression carefully as I opened the folder and spread the medical records across the small cafe table. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of something, panic perhaps, before her professional composure reasserted itself. Sarah, you know how dangerous it can be for parents to try to interpret medical information without proper training, she said smoothly. These things are much more complex than they appear on paper, but I wasn't backing down this time. I had spent months deferring to her expertise, accepting her explanations even when they didn't feel right, trusting her judgment over my own maternal instincts. Then explain this to me, I said, pointing to a test result that Dr. Chen had highlighted. This echocardiogram from 3 weeks ago shows normal heart function, but you told me it revealed deteriorating cardiac performance. How do you reconcile those two things? Lisa's eyes darted to the document, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to formulate an explanation that would maintain her narrative. Sometimes these results can be misleading, she said, but her voice lacked the absolute certainty it had carried before. The interpretation requires understanding the broader clinical picture, not just isolated test results. She reached for the papers as if to put them away, but I held firm. Lisa, I've already spoken with Dr. Chen about these results. She's reviewed Emma's entire medical history, and she's telling me something very different from what you've been saying. She thinks Emma's prognosis is actually quite good with the right surgical intervention. The transformation in Lisa's demeanor was immediate and startling. The caring sister and concerned medical professional disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. Sarah, you're making a mistake trusting that surgeon, she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. Chen is young and inexperienced, and she's clearly trying to convince you to pursue expensive surgical procedures that Emma doesn't need. She's taking advantage of your emotions and your desire for good news. I've been protecting you from making a terrible decision that could harm Emma permanently. But even as she spoke, I could see the cracks in her armor widening. Her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee cup, and she kept glancing around the cafe as if looking for an escape route. Protecting me from what, exactly? I pressed. From the truth. From the fact that my daughter might actually live. From the possibility that all the suffering we've been through was unnecessary. The accusation hung in the air between us, and for a moment Lisa's mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. You don't understand the complexity of what's been involved in Emma's care, she said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and looked around to make sure no one was listening. The trials she's been enrolled in have provided her with access to cutting-edge treatments that wouldn't otherwise be available. I've been using my professional connections to give her opportunities that other children in her situation could never get. You should be grateful for what I've done, not questioning my judgment. The word grateful hit me like a physical blow. Grateful for months of believing my child was dying. Grateful for the sleepless nights, the financial devastation, the emotional torture. Grateful for watching my husband work himself to exhaustion trying to pay for treatments that our daughter didn't need. Lisa, I know about the payments, I said quietly, watching her face go pale. I know about the clinical trial compensation, the referral fees, all of it. Dr. Chen showed me the documentation. You've been using Emma as a source of income while watching our family fall apart. Lisa's reaction was swift and vicious. She leaned forward across the table, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You have no idea what you're talking about, she hissed. Those payments are standard practice in clinical research. They help cover the costs of providing enhanced medical care. Everything I've done has been in Emma's best interest, and if you're too ignorant to understand that, then maybe you're not equipped to make decisions about her treatment. The contempt in her voice was unmistakable, and I realized that this was probably how she had always seen me, as someone too naive and uneducated to understand the complexity of medical decision-making. But I was no longer the desperate, frightened mother who had deferred to her expertise for months. Then you won't mind if I share this information with the medical board, I said, pulling out my phone. If everything you've done is standard practice and in Emma's best interest, then surely they'll support your actions. Lisa's eyes widened as she realized that her carefully constructed facade was crumbling beyond repair. Sarah, you're being hysterical, she said, but the desperation in her voice betrayed her fear. If you go to the medical board with these accusations, you'll destroy my career based on misunderstandings and emotional overreactions. The irony of her calling me hysterical wasn't lost on me. For months she had dismissed my concerns about Emma's treatment as maternal anxiety, my questions about prognosis as emotional denial, my financial worries as lack of perspective. Now faced with the prospect of accountability for her actions, she was resorting to the same patronizing language she had always used to control me. "This conversation is over," I said, gathering up the documents and standing to leave. "Emma deserves better than what you've given her, and so do we." As I walked toward the door, Lisa's voice followed me across the cafe. "Sarah, wait," she called out, her tone shifting from anger to pleading. "You're making a huge mistake. If you pursue this, you'll hurt more than just me. There are other families involved, other children who are benefiting from these programs. You'll destroy something that's helping sick kids get the treatment they need." But I didn't turn around. I had heard enough of her justifications and manipulations to last a lifetime. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. Lisa's reaction had confirmed everything that Dr. Chen had suspected. The desperate attempts to maintain her narrative, the threats about destroying her career, the last-minute appeals to think about other families. It all pointed to someone who knew she had been caught in a systematic pattern of fraud and abuse. But more than that, it revealed the complete absence of remorse for what she had put our family through. Even faced with undeniable evidence of her deception, she was more concerned about protecting herself than acknowledging the harm she had caused. That afternoon, I called Dr. Chen's office to schedule Emma's corrective surgery. The procedure that Lisa had told us was too risky and unlikely to succeed, was actually routine for a child with Emma's condition. Dr. Chen explained that the surgery had a success rate of over 95%, and that most children went on to live completely normal lives afterward. The contrast between this information and the months of doom and gloom we had been fed was staggering. Emma could have had this surgery months ago, sparing our family the emotional and financial devastation we had endured. As I held Emma that evening, watching her smile and reach for her toys with the innocent joy of a healthy baby, I felt a mix of relief and rage that threatened to overwhelm me. Relief that my daughter was going to be okay, that the nightmare of her supposed terminal illness was finally over. But rage at the realization that Lisa had stolen precious months from our family, months that should have been filled with hope and healing instead of fear and desperation. She had turned what should have been a challenging but manageable medical situation into a traumatic experience that would haunt us for years to come. Michael returned home that evening to find me surrounded by printouts of medical licensing board complaint forms, ethics violations reports, and fraud investigation procedures. "I want to make sure she never does this to another family," I told him as he sat down beside me on the couch. "What she did to us was evil, and there have to be consequences." He nodded grimly, pulling me close as Emma played contentedly on the floor between us. "Whatever you need to do, I'm with you," he said. "That woman destroyed our lives for money, and she needs to pay for what she's done." The next morning, I began the process of filing formal complaints against both Lisa and Dr. Wilson. The medical licensing board took my concerns seriously, especially when I provided them with the detailed documentation that Dr. Chen had helped me compile. Within days, investigators were contacting me for additional information and requesting permission to access Emma's complete medical records. The scope of their inquiry suggested that our case might be part of a larger pattern of abuse that extended beyond just our family. As word of the investigation began to spread through the medical community, other families started coming forward with similar stories. A mother whose premature twins had been enrolled in unnecessary studies, a father whose son with diabetes had been subjected to experimental treatments that had no medical justification, a grandmother whose granddaughter had been used as a test subject for treatments she didn't need. Each story followed the same pattern: vulnerable families being manipulated by medical professionals they trusted, children being exploited for financial gain, lives being devastated for profit. The revelation that we weren't alone in our suffering was both comforting and horrifying. Comforting because it validated our experience and proved that we hadn't been foolish or naive to trust Lisa's medical expertise. Horrifying because it revealed the scope of the abuse and the number of families who had been victimized by this systematic fraud. The investigators told us that the network of corrupt medical professionals might have generated millions of dollars in fraudulent clinical trial fees over several years, with dozens of children being used as unwitting test subjects. Lisa's attempts to discredit Dr. Chen and maintain her narrative became increasingly desperate as the investigation intensified. She contacted other family members, trying to convince them that I was having a mental breakdown and making false accusations against her.
She reached out to Michael's employer, suggesting that the stress of Emma's condition was affecting his work performance and reliability. She even called Child Protective Services, claiming that I was endangering Emma by refusing appropriate medical treatment. Each of these tactics revealed the depth of her desperation and her willingness to cause additional harm to protect herself. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attempts at damage control only served to demonstrate her consciousness of guilt. The Medical Licensing Board's investigation uncovered a sophisticated scheme involving multiple physicians, research coordinators, and pharmaceutical companies. Financial records showed a pattern of payments that clearly violated ethical guidelines for clinical research, while medical records revealed systematic falsification of patient information to qualify children for studies they didn't belong in. The day that formal charges were filed against Lisa and Dr. Wilson marked a turning point in our healing process. Emma's surgery was scheduled for the following week, and Dr. Chen was confident about the outcome. For the first time in months, Michael and I were able to look toward the future with hope instead of dread. Our daughter was going to live, and the people who had tried to profit from her suffering were going to face justice for their crimes. As I sat in Emma's nursery that night, watching her sleep
peacefully in preparation for the surgery that would finally correct her heart defect, I thought about the strength that this experience had given me. Lisa had intended to keep me dependent on her expertise and authority, but instead she had taught me to trust my own instincts and fight for what was right. The desperate, frightened mother who had blindly followed her sister's guidance was gone, replaced by someone who would never again allow anyone to victimize her family. The path ahead would still be challenging. Emma's surgery, while routine, carried inherent risks that any parent would worry about. The legal proceedings against Lisa and her co-conspirators would likely take years to resolve completely. The financial damage to our family would take time to repair, and the emotional scars from months of believing our daughter was dying would require ongoing healing. But for the first time since Emma was born, I felt like we were finally in control of our own destiny, free from the manipulation and lies that had defined our experience for so long. Emma's surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Phoenix Children's Hospital, a facility that felt worlds apart from the clinical environments where Lisa had orchestrated her deception. The pediatric wing was bright and cheerful, with colorful murals depicting cartoon animals and inspirational messages about courage and healing. As Michael and I sat in the preoperative waiting area, holding our daughter who was blissfully unaware of the magnitude of what was about to happen, I couldn't help but think about how different this experience felt from everything we had endured over the past months. Dr. Chen arrived early that morning to personally review Emma's case one final time. Her presence was reassuring in a way that stood in stark contrast to the anxiety and uncertainty that had characterized every previous medical interaction under Lisa's influence. "I want you both to know that Emma's condition is exactly what we expected based on our independent evaluation," she said, sitting down across from us in the family consultation room. "The surgery will take approximately 3 hours, and I'm confident that we can achieve a complete repair of her heart defect. Within 6 months, she should be living the normal, active life that any child her age deserves." The simplicity and directness of Dr. Chen's communication was revelatory. There were no cryptic warnings about complications that might arise, no ominous discussions of worst-case scenarios, no suggestions that we needed to prepare ourselves for devastating outcomes. Just straightforward medical information delivered with competence and compassion. It occurred to me that this was probably how most families experienced pediatric medical care, without the layer of manipulation and fear that Lisa had imposed on our situation. The contrast highlighted just how abnormal and deliberately traumatic our previous experience had been. As the nursing staff prepared Emma for surgery, I found myself studying every interaction, every procedure, every conversation with heightened awareness. The anesthesiologist explained exactly what medications would be used and why. The surgical nurse walked us through the timeline of the procedure step by step, and the resident physician answered our questions with patience and thoroughness. Each of these professionals treated us as informed participants in Emma's care, rather than helpless victims who needed to be managed and controlled. The difference was profound and healing in ways I hadn't expected. Michael squeezed my hand as we watched the surgical team wheel Emma away, her tiny form looking impossibly small on the hospital gurney. "She's going to be okay," he said, and for the first time in months those words carried genuine conviction rather than desperate hope. We had finally escaped the web of lies that had defined our understanding of Emma's condition, and we were dealing with medical reality rather than manufactured crisis. The surgery was serious, certainly, but it was a routine procedure being performed by skilled professionals who had no ulterior motives beyond healing our daughter. The waiting room became our temporary home for the next several hours. Unlike the sterile, anxiety-inducing environments where we had spent so much time during Lisa's management of Emma's care, this space was designed with families in mind. There were comfortable seating areas, a small kitchen where we could prepare snacks, and large windows that let in natural light. Other families were there for their own reasons, some dealing with emergencies, others undergoing planned procedures like ours. The atmosphere was one of hope and healing rather than doom and despair. During the wait, I received several text messages from family members who had heard about the investigation into Lisa's conduct. The responses were mixed and revealing. Some relatives expressed shock and disbelief, unable to reconcile the caring medical professional they knew with the evidence of fraud and manipulation. Others admitted that they had always found Lisa's behavior somewhat controlling and were not entirely surprised by the revelations. A few family members suggested that I was being vindictive and destroying Lisa's career over a misunderstanding, responses that demonstrated how effectively she had cultivated her reputation as a dedicated healthcare provider. The most disturbing message came from my mother, Patricia, who had always favored Lisa and viewed her medical career as the family's greatest achievement. "Sarah, I think you're making a terrible mistake," the text read. "Lisa has only ever tried to help Emma, and now you're destroying her life because you're upset about the medical bills. Sometimes treatments are expensive, but that doesn't mean the doctors are trying to cheat you. You need to drop these accusations before you ruin everything for everyone." The message revealed how little my mother understood about what had actually happened and how deeply Lisa's manipulation had affected even our extended family relationships. Michael's reaction to these family dynamics was less charitable than mine. "They're more concerned about protecting Lisa's reputation than they are about what she did to Emma," he observed, reading over my shoulder as I scrolled through the messages. "It's like they can't even see that their granddaughter was used as a lab rat for profit. How is that something you defend or excuse?" His anger was justified, but I found myself feeling more sad than furious about our family's response. Lisa's deception had been so thorough that even now, faced with evidence of her crimes, some people preferred to believe that I was the problem rather than accept the truth about her actions. Dr. Chen emerged from the operating room exactly 3 hours and 15 minutes after the surgery had begun, still wearing her surgical scrubs but with a broad smile that immediately put our fears to rest. "Everything went perfectly," she announced, pulling up a chair to sit with us in the consultation area. "Emma's heart defect has been completely repaired, and she tolerated the procedure beautifully. Her vital signs are strong, and I expect her recovery to be uncomplicated. You'll be able to see her in about an hour once she's stable in the recovery room." The relief that flooded through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For months I had been bracing myself for the worst possible outcomes, conditioned by Lisa's manipulation to expect devastating news at every turn. To hear words of genuine hope and healing from a medical professional who had no agenda beyond Emma's well-being was overwhelming in the best possible way. Michael and I held each other and cried, not from fear or despair as we had so many times before, but from joy and gratitude that our daughter's future was finally secure. As Dr. Chen explained Emma's post-operative care and recovery timeline, I was struck by how different this conversation felt from every medical discussion we had endured under Lisa's influence. There was no hidden agenda, no financial motivation driving the recommendations, no attempt to manipulate our emotions or exploit our vulnerability. Dr. Chen spoke about Emma's prognosis with confidence and optimism, describing a future where our daughter would be able to participate in sports, travel, and live without any significant medical restrictions. The contrast with Lisa's doom and gloom predictions was so stark that it seemed almost surreal. The recovery room was quiet and peaceful, with Emma sleeping soundly under the careful monitoring of specialized cardiac nurses. Seeing her connected to various machines and monitors was initially alarming, but the nursing staff explained each device and its purpose, helping us understand that everything was functioning exactly as expected. Emma's color was better than it had been in months, and her breathing was steady and strong. For the first time since her birth, she looked like a healthy baby, rather than a child burdened by serious medical complications. Over the next few days, as Emma's recovery progressed smoothly, I began to fully comprehend the magnitude of what Lisa had stolen from our family. The surgery that she had described as extremely risky and unlikely to succeed had been routine and successful. The supposedly terminal condition that had dominated our lives for months was now completely resolved. The financial devastation that we had accepted as the price of trying to save our daughter's life had been unnecessary and deliberately imposed. The emotional trauma that had nearly destroyed our marriage and our mental health had been manufactured for profit. The nursing staff at Phoenix Children's Hospital treated Emma's case as exactly what it was: a successful repair of a congenital heart defect in an otherwise healthy infant. There was no discussion of experimental treatments, no enrollment in clinical trials, no suggestions that Emma's condition was anything other than straightforward to manage. The contrast with our previous experience was so dramatic that it felt like we were living in an entirely different medical reality, which in many ways, we were. During Emma's hospital stay, I received a call from the Medical Licensing Board investigator assigned to our case. The investigation had expanded significantly as more families came forward with similar experiences, and the evidence against Lisa and her co-conspirators was mounting rapidly. "Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that your complaint has opened up a much larger investigation," the investigator explained. "We've identified at least 15 other families who appear to have been victimized by the same network of providers. The financial fraud alone amounts to several $1,000,000, but the harm to these families goes far beyond monetary damages." The investigator went on to explain that Lisa's scheme had been operating for at least 5 years, targeting families with sick children who were most vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation. The clinical trials that children were enrolled in were legitimate research studies, but the participants were recruited through fraudulent means and often didn't meet the actual criteria for inclusion. Some of the treatments administered were not only unnecessary but potentially harmful, creating real medical risks for children who were already dealing with serious health conditions. The scope of the investigation was staggering. Federal agencies were now involved due to the fraudulent use of research funds and the violation of clinical trial regulations. Insurance companies were launching their own investigations into fraudulent billing practices. Medical institutions were reviewing their oversight procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. What had started as my personal quest for answers about Emma's treatment had evolved into a comprehensive examination of systemic problems in pediatric clinical research. As Emma continued to recover, other families affected by Lisa's fraud began reaching out to me directly. Each conversation was both heartbreaking and validating, revealing patterns of manipulation and exploitation that were remarkably similar to our own experience. Parents described months or years of being told their children were dying when they weren't, of being enrolled in expensive and unnecessary treatments, of watching their families fall apart under the stress of manufactured medical crises. The emotional toll on these families was devastating and long-lasting, with some children requiring therapy to recover from the trauma of being told they were terminally ill. One mother, whose daughter had been subjected to an experimental diabetes treatment that she didn't need, broke down crying as she described the guilt she felt for allowing her child to be used as a test subject. "I trusted them completely," she said through her tears. "When they told me this treatment might save her life, I would have done anything to give her that chance. I never imagined that they were lying about how sick she was just to qualify her for a study that would make them money." Her story, like so many others, highlighted the absolute betrayal of trust that was at the heart of Lisa's crimes. The financial impact on families was equally devastating. Many had taken out second mortgages, depleted retirement savings, or gone deep into debt to pay for treatments their children didn't need. Insurance companies had paid out millions of dollars in fraudulent claims, costs that were ultimately passed on to other policyholders. The ripple effects of Lisa's fraud extended far beyond her immediate victims, affecting the entire healthcare system and undermining trust in medical professionals and institutions. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about how Lisa's network operated. She had cultivated relationships with pharmaceutical companies conducting clinical trials, offering to provide a steady stream of eligible participants in exchange for substantial consulting fees. She worked with other medical professionals to create a referral system that directed vulnerable families toward these profitable studies. The entire operation was sophisticated and deliberate, designed to maximize profits while minimizing the risk of detection. The psychological manipulation employed by Lisa and her accomplices was particularly insidious. They targeted families during moments of maximum vulnerability, when parents were desperate for hope and willing to trust medical authority without question. They used technical medical language to confuse and intimidate, making it difficult for families to seek second opinions or question treatment recommendations.
They created artificial urgency around treatment decisions, pressuring families to act quickly, without taking time to research alternatives or consult other physicians. Emma's discharge from the hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. Dr. Chen's final examination confirmed that the surgery had been completely successful, and that Emma's heart was functioning normally. The restrictions and limitations that Lisa had imposed on our daily routines were suddenly irrelevant. Emma could be held and played with like any normal baby. She could travel, attend daycare, and participate in all the activities that we had been told were too dangerous for her condition. The freedom was exhilarating and bittersweet, knowing how much time we had lost to unnecessary fear and restrictions. The legal proceedings against Lisa and her co-conspirators were moving forward rapidly. Criminal charges had been filed for fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Civil lawsuits were being prepared by multiple families seeking damages for the harm they had suffered. Medical licensing boards in several states were conducting hearings to revoke or suspend the licenses of the medical professionals involved. The network that had seemed so powerful and unassailable just months earlier was crumbling under the weight of evidence and accountability. Lisa's attempts to maintain her innocence became increasingly desperate and pathetic as the evidence against her mounted. She hired expensive lawyers who attempted to portray her as a dedicated healthcare provider who had been misunderstood and falsely accused. They claimed that the payments she received were legitimate compensation for research coordination, and that any negative outcomes were the result of the underlying medical conditions rather than inappropriate treatment. But the documentation was too extensive and damning to be explained away by legal maneuvering. The most damaging evidence came from Lisa's own records, which revealed the calculated and deliberate nature of her deception. Email communications showed her discussing which families would be most profitable to target, how to manipulate medical records to qualify patients for studies, and strategies for avoiding detection by oversight agencies. Financial records demonstrated the direct correlation between patient enrollments and payments received. Medical records showed systematic falsification of symptoms and test results. The paper trail left no doubt about her guilt, or the intentional nature of her crimes. As Emma approached her 6-month birthday, the transformation in our family was remarkable. The constant anxiety and fear that had defined our daily existence had been replaced by joy and optimism about the future. Emma was thriving, meeting all her developmental milestones, and showing no signs of the supposedly terminal condition that had dominated her early months. Michael was able to return to a normal work schedule, no longer needing to take on dangerous overtime assignments to pay for unnecessary medical treatments. Our marriage, which had been strained to the breaking point by months of crisis and financial pressure, was healing and growing stronger. The financial recovery was slower but steady. Insurance companies were beginning to reimburse us for the fraudulent treatments Emma had received, and a victim compensation fund was being established to help families affected by the scheme. We were also pursuing a civil lawsuit against Lisa and her accomplices, seeking damages for the emotional distress, financial harm, and medical malpractice we had suffered. While money could never fully compensate for what we had endured, the prospect of justice and accountability was important for our healing process. The emotional healing was perhaps the most complex aspect of our recovery. While we were grateful that Emma was healthy and that the truth had been revealed, the trauma of believing our child was dying had left deep scars that would take time to heal. We began family therapy to address the trust issues, anxiety, and relationship problems that had resulted from months of manipulation and stress. Emma, thankfully, was too young to have been psychologically damaged by the experience, but we were committed to being vigilant about protecting her from any future exploitation or abuse. The broader impact of our case was beginning to be felt throughout the medical community. Hospitals and research institutions were implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar abuses. Medical licensing boards were increasing scrutiny of physicians involved in clinical research. Federal agencies were strengthening regulations governing the recruitment and enrollment of pediatric patients in experimental studies. While these changes came too late to help our family and the others who had been victimized, they offered hope that future families might be protected from similar exploitation. The trial preparation process was intensive and emotionally draining, requiring us to relive the trauma of Emma's early months in excruciating detail. But it was also empowering to see how our experience was being used to build a case for justice and accountability. The prosecutors were confident that the evidence would support convictions on all charges, and they were seeking significant prison sentences for Lisa and her co-conspirators. The message being sent was clear: the exploitation of sick children for financial gain would be met with the full force of the law. The courtroom was packed on the day of Lisa's sentencing, filled with families whose lives had been shattered by her systematic exploitation of vulnerable children. Emma, now a healthy 18-month-old toddler, sat on my lap playing with her favorite stuffed elephant, completely oblivious to the significance of the moment. As I looked around the room at the other parents who had endured similar ordeals, I felt a profound sense of solidarity and shared purpose. We had all been victimized by the same predatory scheme, but we had also found the courage to speak out and demand justice. Judge Catherine Morrison had presided over the entire trial, with a gravity and attention to detail that befitted the seriousness of the charges. Over the course of 6 weeks, the prosecution had methodically presented evidence that painted a damning picture of Lisa's criminal enterprise. Financial records showed millions of dollars in fraudulent payments, medical records revealed systematic falsification of patient information, and testimony from affected families demonstrated the devastating human cost of her actions. The defense had attempted to portray Lisa as a dedicated healthcare provider who had made mistakes in judgment, but the overwhelming evidence of intentional fraud made their arguments unconvincing. Dr. Wilson had already been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges. His cooperation with prosecutors had been instrumental in building the case against Lisa and exposing the full scope of the criminal network. During his testimony, he had broken down while describing how the financial incentives had gradually corrupted his medical judgment, leading him to prioritize profits over patient welfare. His remorse seemed genuine, but it couldn't undo the harm he had helped inflict on dozens of families. Lisa, however, had maintained her innocence throughout the proceedings, refusing to accept responsibility for the devastation she had caused. Her testimony had been defensive and self-serving, filled with attempts to justify her actions and blame others for any negative outcomes. She portrayed herself as a victim of a complex medical system and suggested that the families bringing charges against her were motivated by greed rather than justice. Her lack of remorse and continued denial of responsibility had clearly influenced the judge's decision about sentencing. The victim impact statements had been the most powerful part of the trial. Family after family took the stand to describe how Lisa's fraud had affected their lives, their children's health, and their faith in the medical system. One father described watching his son undergo painful and unnecessary procedures, while believing they were essential to save his life. A mother recounted the months she spent preparing for her daughter's death, only to discover that the child's condition was actually treatable and not life-threatening. Each story was a testament to the profound psychological and emotional damage that Lisa's deception had inflicted. When it was my turn to address the court, I looked directly at Lisa as I spoke about the months of terror she had put our family through. "You watched my husband work himself to exhaustion trying to pay for treatments you knew Emma didn't need," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. "You watched me plan my daughter's funeral, while she played happily in my arms, healthy and strong. You stole precious time from our family that we can never get back, and you did it all for money. The cruelest part is that you made us grateful for your deception, thanking you for helping us access treatments that were actually harming our child." Lisa's expression remained impassive throughout my statement, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as I described the impact of her actions on Emma's early development. The unnecessary medications she had prescribed had caused developmental delays that required months of therapy to correct. The constant medical appointments and procedures had disrupted Emma's sleep patterns and feeding schedule. The stress and anxiety that permeated our household during those early months had affected Emma's emotional development in ways that we were still discovering. The financial restitution hearing had taken place the previous week, with the court ordering Lisa to pay damages to the affected families. The total amount exceeded $4 million, representing not only the direct costs of unnecessary treatments, but also compensation for emotional distress, lost wages, and future therapy needs. Lisa's assets, including her home, practice and investment accounts, had been seized to satisfy the judgment. While the money would help with our recovery, it could never fully compensate for the trauma and lost time that her crimes had caused. Judge Morrison's sentencing remarks were thorough and scathing. She described Lisa's actions as a systematic betrayal of the most sacred trust in our society, the trust that parents place in medical professionals to heal their children. The judge noted that Lisa had specifically targeted families with sick children because they were most vulnerable to manipulation and least likely to question medical authority. She emphasized that the crimes had not been committed in a moment of weakness or desperation, but were the result of a calculated and sustained pattern of exploitation. The defendant has shown no remorse for her actions, and no acknowledgement of the harm she has caused, Judge Morrison continued. She has attempted to portray herself as a victim while refusing to accept responsibility for the systematic abuse of vulnerable families. Her actions have not only harmed individual families, but have also undermined public trust in medical research and pediatric care. The judge's words resonated throughout the courtroom, capturing the broader implications of Lisa's crimes beyond the immediate victims. The sentence was more severe than even the prosecutors had requested. Lisa was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She would also be required to pay full restitution to all affected families, and would be permanently barred from working in any healthcare-related field. The judge noted that the lengthy sentence was necessary to reflect the severity of the crimes, and to deter others who might consider similar exploitation of vulnerable populations. Lisa's reaction to the sentence was one of shock and disbelief. Throughout the trial, her lawyers had apparently convinced her that she would receive a much lighter punishment, possibly even probation with community service. As the reality of 15 years in prison sank in, she began crying for the first time during the proceedings. Her family members, who had supported her throughout the trial, looked stunned by the severity of the sentence. The transformation from confident defendant to convicted felon was stark and immediate. The other medical professionals involved in the scheme received sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with investigators. Several nurses and research coordinators, who had helped recruit patients, received suspended sentences and probation in exchange for their testimony. The pharmaceutical companies that had paid the fraudulent fees were fined millions of dollars, and agreed to implement new oversight procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. The impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. Medical licensing boards across the country implemented new regulations governing physician involvement in clinical research. Hospitals and research institutions established independent oversight committees to monitor patient recruitment and ensure that financial incentives didn't compromise medical judgment. The federal government strengthened regulations governing pediatric clinical trials and increased penalties for research fraud. Emma's first birthday party had taken place during the trial, a bittersweet celebration that marked both her recovery and the ongoing legal proceedings. As she stumbled around our backyard chasing soap bubbles and laughing with pure joy, it was hard to believe that just months earlier we had been preparing for her death. Her development was now completely normal, with no signs of the heart condition that had once dominated our lives. The surgery had been so successful that she would need only annual checkups to monitor her progress. The foundation that Michael and I established in Emma's name had already begun helping other families navigate the complex world of pediatric medical
care. We provided resources for obtaining second opinions, understanding medical terminology, and recognizing potential signs of exploitation or fraud. Our goal was to empower parents to be informed advocates for their children while still maintaining trust in legitimate medical professionals who had their patients' best interests at heart. Dr. Chen had become not just Emma's physician but also a trusted friend and advisor. She served on the board of our foundation and helped develop educational materials for parents dealing with serious pediatric medical conditions. Her commitment to transparency and patient advocacy stood in stark contrast to the manipulative behavior we had experienced with Lisa. She represented everything that the medical profession should aspire to be: competent, compassionate, and completely focused on patient welfare. The therapy sessions that our family attended had been instrumental in helping us process the trauma and rebuild our relationships. Emma, thankfully, was too young to have been psychologically damaged by the experience, but Michael and I had to work through issues of trust, guilt, and anger that had accumulated during the months of deception. The therapist helped us understand that we had been victims of a sophisticated manipulation scheme and that our trust in Lisa's medical expertise had been entirely reasonable given her credentials and family relationship. One of the most difficult aspects of our recovery was dealing with family members who continued to support Lisa even after her conviction. My mother, Patricia, maintained that Lisa had been unfairly prosecuted and that her intentions had been good despite the outcome. This denial of reality created additional stress and forced us to establish boundaries with relatives who couldn't acknowledge the truth about what had happened. Some relationships were permanently damaged by their refusal to accept Lisa's guilt and our need for justice. The media attention surrounding the case had been intense but largely supportive of the victims. Several investigative journalists had done in-depth reporting on the broader issues of research fraud and exploitation in pediatric medicine. Their coverage helped raise awareness about the warning signs that parents should watch for and the importance of seeking independent medical opinions when dealing with serious childhood illnesses. The publicity also encouraged other victims to come forward, expanding the investigation and leading to additional prosecutions. Emma's second birthday approached as we began to find our new normal as a family. The constant medical appointments and anxiety that had characterized her early months were now just painful memories. She was developing into a bright, energetic toddler who loved books, music, and playing with other children. Her favorite game was Pretend Doctor, where she would use her toy stethoscope to fix her stuffed animals. The irony wasn't lost on us, but we were grateful that her understanding of medicine was now associated with healing rather than fear. The civil lawsuits against Lisa and her co-conspirators were still working their way through the courts, but the criminal convictions had strengthened our position significantly. Our lawyer was confident that we would recover substantial damages, which would help secure Emma's future and fund the foundation's work. More importantly, the legal proceedings had established clear precedents that would make it easier for future victims to seek justice and hold corrupt medical professionals accountable. The medical community's response to the case had been largely positive, with professional organizations implementing new ethical guidelines and oversight procedures. However, some physicians had expressed concern that the increased scrutiny might discourage legitimate clinical research and make it harder for children to access experimental treatments. We understood these concerns but believed that protecting vulnerable families from exploitation was more important than maintaining the status quo. As we looked toward the future, our priorities had shifted dramatically from where they had been during Emma's early months. Financial security, while still important, was no longer our primary concern. Instead, we focused on enjoying our time together as a family and working to prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. Emma's health and happiness had become our measure of success rather than our ability to afford expensive treatments or access exclusive medical programs. The final chapter of our legal battle concluded when Lisa's appeal was denied by the Federal Appeals Court. Her conviction and sentence were upheld, meaning she would serve the full 15 years in prison. The appeals court noted that the evidence of systematic fraud had been overwhelming and that the trial court had appropriately considered the scope of harm to victims in determining the sentence. For us, this represented the final legal vindication of our decision to pursue justice despite family pressure to let the matter drop. Emma is now a healthy, happy 4-year-old who loves swimming, dancing, and playing with her friends at preschool. Her heart condition is completely resolved and she has no memory of the trauma that dominated her early months. When people ask about her medical history, we sometimes struggle with how much to share. The story of Lisa's betrayal is complex and disturbing, but it's also a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of trusting parental instincts even when faced with medical authority. The foundation we established has helped hundreds of families navigate pediatric medical care and has contributed to policy changes that better protect children in clinical research. We've testified before congressional committees, spoken at medical conferences, and worked with patient advocacy groups to raise awareness about research fraud. While we never wanted to become public advocates, the experience taught us that silence in the face of injustice only enables further abuse. Dr. Chen continues to be Emma's cardiologist, providing annual checkups that consistently show normal heart function. She has become a leader in pediatric cardiology and serves as a consultant on research ethics for several major medical institutions. Her willingness to speak out against Lisa's fraud despite potential professional risks exemplifies the courage and integrity that should define the medical profession. The other families affected by Lisa's scheme have had varying degrees of success in their recovery. Some children required extensive therapy to overcome the psychological trauma of being told they were dying. Others suffered lasting physical effects from unnecessary treatments. A few families never fully recovered financially from the costs of fraudulent medical care. However, most have found ways to move forward and rebuild their lives, strengthened by the knowledge that they helped expose a dangerous criminal enterprise. Lisa remains in federal prison, where she will likely stay for many more years. Reports from other inmates suggest that she continues to maintain her innocence and refuses to acknowledge the harm she caused. Her medical license has been permanently revoked and she faces additional civil lawsuits from families who weren't part of the original criminal case. The woman who once wielded considerable power and authority in medical settings is now just another convicted felon serving time for her crimes. The legacy of our experience extends beyond our family and even beyond the specific crimes that Lisa committed. The case highlighted systemic vulnerabilities in pediatric medical research and led to meaningful reforms that better protect children from exploitation. It demonstrated the importance of independent oversight in clinical trials and the need for transparency in financial relationships between physicians and pharmaceutical companies. As Emma grows older, we plan to share her story with her in age-appropriate ways, helping her understand both the trauma she survived and the justice that was ultimately achieved. We want her to know that her early suffering wasn't meaningless, that it led to changes that will protect other children from similar exploitation. Most importantly, we want her to understand that even when trusted authority figures betray that trust, it's possible to fight back and create positive change. The journey from victims to advocates has been long and difficult, but it has also been healing and empowering. We've learned to trust our instincts, question authority when necessary, and never again allow anyone to exploit our family's vulnerability. Emma's health and happiness are daily reminders that truth ultimately prevails over deception and that love and persistence can overcome even the most calculated betrayal. 5 years have passed since that terrifying day when I believed my daughter was dying, and Emma is now a vibrant 9-year-old who runs track at her elementary school and plays violin in the school orchestra. Her energy is boundless, her laughter infectious, and watching her race across the playground with her friends fills me with a joy that I never take for granted. The heart condition that once dominated our lives is now nothing more than a line item in her medical records, a footnote to a childhood that has been filled with normalcy and happiness rather than fear and desperation. The scars from our ordeal run deeper than Emma's surgical site, which has long since faded to a barely visible line on her chest. The psychological wounds inflicted by Lisa's betrayal required years of healing, not just for Michael and me, but for our entire extended family. The foundation we established in Emma's name has grown into a national organization that provides support and advocacy for families dealing with pediatric medical fraud. We never imagined that our personal nightmare would become the catalyst for systemic change, but the work we do now gives meaning to the suffering we endured. Dr. Chen remains Emma's cardiologist, though our visits are now limited to annual checkups that consistently show perfect heart function. She has become more than just a physician to our family. She's a trusted mentor who taught us the importance of questioning medical authority when something doesn't feel right. Her willingness to challenge Lisa's narrative when other doctors might have deferred to a colleague's expertise literally saved Emma's childhood and possibly her life. The contrast between her transparent, patient-centered approach and Lisa's manipulative exploitation could not be more stark. The legal ramifications of Lisa's crimes continue to reverberate through the medical community. Her 15-year prison sentence was upheld on appeal, and she remains incarcerated in a federal facility in Texas. Recent reports indicate that she has finally begun to acknowledge some responsibility for her actions, though whether this represents genuine remorse or simply a calculated attempt to improve her chances for early parole remains unclear. The other defendants in the case have all been released after serving their sentences, but most have been permanently barred from working in healthcare fields. The financial recovery from our civil lawsuits exceeded our expectations, providing not only compensation for the trauma we endured but also the resources to establish our foundation on solid footing. The settlement funds have been carefully invested to ensure long-term sustainability for our advocacy work, allowing us to help other families navigate the complex world of pediatric medicine without the financial pressures that once threatened to destroy us. Every dollar we received feels like a victory, not just for our family but for all the families who suffered similar exploitation. Emma's understanding of her early medical history has evolved as she's grown older and become capable of processing more complex information. We've shared her story with her gradually, emphasizing both the challenges we faced and the positive changes that resulted from our decision to seek justice. She takes pride in knowing that her experience has helped protect other children from similar exploitation, and she's expressed interest in pursuing a career in medicine herself. The irony of our daughter wanting to become a doctor after everything we went through with corrupt medical professionals is not lost on us, but we support her aspirations while ensuring she understands the ethical responsibilities that come with medical practice. The broader impact of our case on medical research practices has been significant and lasting. Federal regulations governing pediatric clinical trials have been strengthened, with new requirements for independent oversight and more stringent penalties for research fraud. Medical licensing boards across the country have implemented enhanced monitoring procedures for physicians involved in clinical research, and several states have passed laws requiring more transparency in financial relationships between doctors and pharmaceutical companies.
While these changes came too late to protect our family, they offer hope that future families will be better safeguarded against similar exploitation. Our foundation's work has expanded beyond simply helping families identify and report medical fraud. We've developed educational programs for medical students and residents that emphasize the ethical responsibilities of clinical research and the importance of maintaining patient welfare above financial considerations. We've also created support groups for families who have been victimized by medical fraud, providing both practical assistance with legal proceedings and emotional support for dealing with the trauma of betrayal by trusted healthcare providers. The most rewarding aspect of our advocacy work has been the letters and messages we receive from families who have been helped by our resources. Parents write to tell us that our educational materials help them recognize warning signs of potential exploitation, or that our legal referral network connected them with attorneys who successfully pursued justice on their behalf. Medical students reach out to thank us for helping them understand the ethical complexities of clinical research and the importance of maintaining patient trust. Each of these communications reminds us that our suffering was not meaningless and that positive change can emerge from even the darkest experiences. The relationships within our extended family have gradually healed, though some wounds remain. My mother, Patricia, eventually came to understand the scope of Lisa's crimes and the harm they caused to our family. Her acceptance of the truth was slow and painful, requiring her to confront the reality that her favored daughter had committed serious crimes against her own niece. The process of rebuilding trust between us took years, but our relationship is now stronger than it has ever been, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than family loyalty that overlooked harmful behavior. Michael and I have also grown stronger as a couple through this experience, though the journey was not always smooth. The stress of believing our child was dying, combined with the financial pressures and family conflicts that resulted from Lisa's deception, put enormous strain on our marriage. We worked with counselors for several years to address the trust issues and communication problems that developed during that traumatic period. The experience taught us the importance of supporting each other through crisis while also maintaining our individual identities and coping mechanisms. Emma's academic performance has been exceptional, and she shows particular aptitude for science and mathematics. Her teachers describe her as a natural leader who shows unusual empathy for classmates who are struggling or different. We believe that her early exposure to medical environments despite the traumatic circumstances has given her a unique perspective on human vulnerability and the importance of helping others. She volunteers at a local children's hospital, reading to young patients and helping with activities that bring joy to their difficult circumstances. The annual medical conferences where we speak about research ethics and patient advocacy have become important milestones in our healing journey. Standing before audiences of medical professionals and sharing our story is both emotionally challenging and deeply satisfying. We've seen attitudes change over the years, with healthcare providers becoming more aware of the potential for exploitation in clinical research and more committed to maintaining the highest ethical standards. The medical community's response to our advocacy efforts has been largely positive, with most professionals recognizing that protecting patient welfare ultimately strengthens rather than weakens the entire healthcare system. Dr. Wilson, the family physician who collaborated with Lisa in her fraudulent scheme, was released from prison after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. His cooperation with prosecutors and apparent genuine remorse earned him credit for good behavior and early release. He has been permanently barred from practicing medicine and now works as a medical equipment salesman, a dramatic fall from his former position of trust and authority. While his cooperation was instrumental in building the case against Lisa, the harm he helped inflict on families cannot be undone by his later assistance to law enforcement. The investigative journalism that exposed the broader patterns of research fraud in pediatric medicine led to a Pulitzer Prize for the reporter who first uncovered the story. Her in-depth coverage not only helped other victims come forward but also prompted congressional hearings that resulted in significant legislative reforms. The public attention generated by her reporting created political pressure for stronger oversight of clinical research and more severe penalties for those who exploit vulnerable populations for financial gain. Emma's social development has been remarkably normal despite her early medical trauma. She has close friendships with classmates who know nothing about her medical history unless she chooses to share it. Her ability to form trusting relationships with adults, including teachers and coaches, suggests that Lisa's betrayal did not create lasting trust issues in her interactions with authority figures. This resilience is a testament to both her natural temperament and the extensive support she received during her recovery from the psychological effects of the fraud. The technology sector has also been influenced by our case, with several companies developing software systems designed to detect patterns of potential research fraud in clinical trials. These systems analyze enrollment patterns, financial relationships, and outcome data to identify suspicious activities that might indicate exploitation of research participants. While technology cannot replace human oversight and ethical judgment, these tools provide additional safeguards that can help prevent future cases of systematic fraud. Our foundation has established scholarship programs for students from low-income families who want to pursue careers in medicine or medical research. These scholarships come with mandatory coursework in research ethics and patient advocacy, ensuring that the next generation of healthcare providers understands both the opportunities and the responsibilities that come with medical practice. Several of our scholarship recipients have gone on to pursue careers in pediatric medicine, bringing fresh perspectives and strong ethical foundations to their chosen fields. The international response to our case has been equally significant, with medical organizations in other countries implementing similar reforms to protect pediatric research participants. The World Health Organization has developed new guidelines for clinical trials involving children, incorporating many of the safeguards that were implemented in the United States following our case. This global impact demonstrates that the lessons learned from our experience have value far beyond our national borders. Emma's relationship with medicine remains complex but generally positive. She understands that the medical profession includes both people like Dr. Chen who dedicate their lives to healing and helping others, and people like Lisa who exploit their positions for personal gain. This nuanced understanding has made her more thoughtful about career choices and more committed to pursuing medicine for the right reasons. Her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital has reinforced her desire to help sick children, but with a clear understanding of the ethical responsibilities that come with medical practice. The speaking engagements that Michael and I undertake on behalf of our foundation have taken us across the country and around the world. Each presentation is an opportunity to share our story and the lessons we've learned about protecting families from medical exploitation. The audiences vary from medical students just beginning their careers to seasoned researchers and administrators, but the message remains consistent. Patient welfare must always be the primary consideration in medical decision-making, and financial incentives should never be allowed to compromise clinical judgment. Looking toward the future, our goals for the foundation continue to evolve as we identify new areas where advocacy and education can make a difference. We're currently developing programs to help families affected by medical AI and algorithmic bias, recognizing that technological advances in medicine bring both opportunities and new risks for patient exploitation. We're also working on initiatives to address healthcare disparities that make some families more vulnerable to fraud and exploitation than others. Emma's plans for high school include advanced placement courses in biology and chemistry, laying the groundwork for eventual medical school applications. She's also interested in participating in ethical debates and mock trial competitions, activities that will help her develop the critical thinking and advocacy skills that are essential for anyone who wants to fight for justice and protect vulnerable populations. Her combination of scientific aptitude and strong moral convictions suggests that she will indeed make an excellent physician someday. The legacy of our experience with Lisa's fraud extends far beyond our family and even beyond the specific reforms that resulted from our case. The story has become part of the curriculum in medical schools across the country, used to teach students about the importance of maintaining ethical standards and the devastating consequences that can result from prioritizing profit over patient welfare. These educational efforts ensure that future healthcare providers will be better prepared to recognize and resist the temptations that led to Lisa's downfall. As I watch Emma practice violin in our living room, her fingers dancing across the strings with confidence and joy, I'm struck by how different our lives might have been if Dr. Chen hadn't had the courage to question Lisa's treatment recommendations. Emma might not be here at all, or she might be dealing with lasting health problems from unnecessary treatments and delayed proper care. Instead, she's a healthy, happy child who dreams of becoming a doctor herself and helping other children overcome medical challenges. The annual memorial service we hold for families who have lost children to medical fraud has become one of our foundation's most important events. While Emma was fortunate enough to survive her ordeal, other children were not so lucky. Some died from complications related to unnecessary treatments, while others suffered permanent disabilities from experimental procedures they never should have received. These memorial services honor their memory while renewing our commitment to preventing future tragedies through advocacy, education, and reform. The book we published about our experience became a bestseller and has been translated into several languages, reaching families around the world who might be facing similar challenges. The royalties from book sales provide additional funding for our foundation's work, creating a sustainable model for continued advocacy efforts. More importantly, the book serves as a resource for families who are navigating complex medical situations and need guidance on how to protect themselves from potential exploitation. Emma's understanding of justice and fairness has been shaped by her early experience as a victim of fraud and her later role as an advocate for other children. She demonstrates remarkable empathy for classmates who are struggling with family problems or health issues, often offering support and assistance without being asked. Her teachers consistently describe her as a natural leader who uses her influence to help others rather than for personal gain. The research we've funded through our foundation has contributed to a better understanding of how medical fraud affects families and communities. Academic studies have documented the long-term psychological and financial impacts of research fraud, providing evidence that supports stronger penalties and more comprehensive victim support services. This research has been instrumental in advocating for policy changes and securing funding for victim assistance programs. As Emma approaches her 10th birthday, she's planning a party that will raise money for our foundation's work, rather than simply celebrating her own milestone. The transformation from a child who was once exploited by the medical system to a young advocate who wants to help protect other children represents the full circle of our journey from victims to champions of justice. Her strength and resilience continue to inspire our work and remind us that positive change is always possible, even in the aftermath of betrayal and trauma. The partnerships we've developed with other patient advocacy organizations have amplified our impact and allowed us to address broader issues within the healthcare system. By working together, we've been able to influence policy at both state and federal levels, creating a more comprehensive framework for protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. These collaborations have also provided mutual support for families dealing with various forms of medical trauma and injustice. 10 years have passed since the nightmare began, and Emma is now a confident 14-year-old preparing for her freshman year of high school with dreams of medical school dancing in her head. She carries herself with the poise of someone who has faced adversity and emerged victorious, though she bears no visible scars from the ordeal that nearly destroyed our family when she was just an infant. Her violin performances at regional competitions have earned her multiple awards, and her volunteer work at Phoenix Children's Hospital has become a defining aspect of her character, demonstrating a compassion that runs deeper than most teenagers her age possess. The foundation we established in Emma's honor has evolved into one of the most respected patient advocacy organizations in the country, with offices in 12 states and partnerships with medical institutions worldwide. Our annual budget now exceeds $5 million, funding research into medical fraud prevention, legal assistance for victimized families, and educational programs that have reached thousands of healthcare providers. The transformation from desperate parents fighting for their daughter's life to national advocates for medical ethics still feels surreal, but the impact we've been able to create validates every difficult moment of our journey. Dr. Rachel Chen has become more than Emma's cardiologist. She's become a lifelong mentor and family friend whose influence extends far beyond the medical realm. Now serving as Chief of Pediatric Cardiology at Phoenix Children's Hospital, she regularly speaks at our foundation events and has co-authored several research papers on preventing medical fraud in pediatric settings. Her decision to challenge Lisa's fraudulent treatment plan when Emma was an infant has saved countless other children from similar exploitation, as the protocols she helped establish have been adopted by hospitals nationwide. The ripple effects of our case continue to shape medical practice and policy more than a decade later. The Lisa Martinez Medical Fraud Prevention Act, passed by Congress 3 years ago, requires comprehensive background checks for all clinical research coordinators and mandates independent oversight for any study involving pediatric participants. The legislation has already prevented several fraudulent schemes from reaching vulnerable families, demonstrating that systemic change can emerge from individual tragedy when people are willing to fight for justice. Emma's academic achievements have been remarkable, maintaining a perfect grade point average while pursuing advanced placement courses in biology, chemistry, and ethics. Her teachers describe her as intellectually gifted but also emotionally mature beyond her years, with an unusual ability to understand complex moral issues and advocate for fairness in all her interactions. The experience of being exploited as an infant, while traumatic
for our family, seems to have instilled in her a deep sense of justice and a commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The documentary that premiered last year about our family's experience and the broader issue of medical fraud won an Emmy Award and has been viewed by millions of people worldwide. Emma, now old enough to fully understand her story, participated in the filming with remarkable composure and eloquence, describing her feelings about being used as a profit center before she could even speak. Her perspective as both a victim and survivor has resonated with audiences and inspired other young people to become advocates for causes they believe in. Michael has found his calling as a construction safety inspector, work that allows him to protect people from exploitation in a different industry while maintaining the flexible schedule necessary for our advocacy efforts. The skills he developed during our legal battle, attention to detail, persistence in uncovering truth, and unwillingness to accept explanations that don't add up, have made him exceptionally effective in identifying safety violations that could harm workers. His transformation from a man focused solely on providing for his family to someone committed to protecting vulnerable populations mirrors our entire family's evolution. The international impact of our advocacy work has exceeded our wildest expectations. The World Health Organization now requires all member nations to implement standardized protections for pediatric research participants, based largely on recommendations developed through our foundation's research. Medical schools in dozens of countries have incorporated our case study into their ethics curricula, ensuring that future physicians understand both the temptations and the consequences of prioritizing profit over patient welfare. Lisa's time in federal prison has been marked by a gradual acknowledgement of the harm she caused, though her journey toward genuine remorse has been slow and painful. Through victim offender mediation programs, she has written letters of apology to several families she victimized, including ours. While we initially rejected her attempts at contact, we eventually agreed to participate in a mediated conversation that allowed Emma to ask Lisa directly why she had been willing to exploit a sick baby for money. The conversation was difficult but ultimately healing, giving Emma closure and demonstrating Lisa's apparent genuine regret for her actions. Emma's relationship with medicine has matured as she's gained a deeper understanding of both its potential for good and its vulnerability to corruption. Her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital has exposed her to physicians who embody the highest ethical standards alongside researchers conducting legitimate studies that genuinely help sick children. This balanced exposure has reinforced her desire to pursue medicine while ensuring she understands the enormous responsibility that comes with treating vulnerable patients. The scholarship program we established for students from disadvantaged backgrounds has now funded over 200 young people pursuing careers in healthcare fields. Many of these scholarship recipients have gone on to become advocates for ethical medical practice in their own right, creating a new generation of healthcare providers who prioritize patient welfare above financial considerations. Several former recipients now work at our foundation, bringing fresh perspectives and renewed energy to our advocacy efforts. The legal precedents established through our case have been cited in hundreds of subsequent medical fraud prosecutions, making it easier for other families to seek justice when they've been victimized by corrupt healthcare providers. The enhanced penalties for medical fraud involving children have served as a powerful deterrent, with several potential schemes being abandoned when perpetrators realize the severity of potential consequences. The legal system's response to our case has demonstrated that society takes seriously the betrayal of trust inherent in medical fraud. Emma's plans for high school include participating in mock trial competitions, bioethics clubs, and a mentorship program with local physicians who have committed to helping her understand the realities of medical practice. She's already been accepted into a prestigious summer program at Johns Hopkins University that will allow her to shadow pediatric specialists and observe the day-to-day challenges of treating sick children. Her combination of academic excellence, practical experience, and moral clarity positions her well for admission to top-tier medical schools. The technology we've helped develop for detecting patterns of research fraud has been adopted by regulatory agencies worldwide, creating an early warning system that can identify suspicious activities before they harm patients. The artificial intelligence algorithms we funded can analyze vast amounts of data to spot anomalies in enrollment patterns, financial relationships, and treatment outcomes that might indicate fraudulent activity. While technology cannot replace human judgment and oversight, these tools provide valuable assistance to investigators working to protect vulnerable populations. Our foundation's annual conference has become one of the most important gatherings of patient advocates, medical ethicists, and healthcare reformers in the world. This year's event attracted over 3,000 attendees from 47 countries, all united in their commitment to preventing the exploitation of vulnerable patients. Emma served as a youth spokesperson at this year's conference, delivering a keynote address that received a standing ovation and inspired dozens of young people to commit to careers in ethical healthcare practice. The memoir I published about our experience has been translated into 15 languages and has become required reading in many medical ethics courses. The book's impact extends beyond the medical community, reaching parents who are navigating their own challenges with pediatric healthcare and need guidance on protecting their children from potential exploitation. The royalties from international sales have provided additional funding for our foundation's global expansion efforts. Dr. Wilson, the family physician who collaborated with Lisa in her fraudulent scheme, has dedicated his life since his release from prison to education about medical ethics and fraud prevention. While he can never practice medicine again, he travels the country speaking to medical students and residents about how financial incentives can corrupt clinical judgment and lead well-intentioned physicians down a path of exploitation. His transformation from perpetrator to educator demonstrates that genuine remorse can lead to meaningful contribution to preventing future crimes. Emma's understanding of forgiveness has been shaped by her interactions with both Lisa and Dr. Wilson, teaching her that accountability and redemption are not mutually exclusive. While she will never forget being used as a profit center during her most vulnerable months, she has learned to separate the harm she suffered from the humanity of those who caused it. This mature perspective on justice and mercy has impressed the adults in her life and suggests she will bring unusual wisdom to her future medical practice. The research we've funded into the long-term effects of medical fraud on families has contributed to a growing body of scientific literature documenting the psychological and financial trauma experienced by victims. This research has been instrumental in securing funding for victim support services and has influenced court decisions regarding appropriate compensation for families who have been exploited. The academic community's recognition of medical fraud as a serious public health issue has elevated the profile of our advocacy efforts and attracted new supporters to our cause. The policy changes implemented at the state level have been particularly gratifying, with 37 states now requiring enhanced oversight of pediatric clinical trials and mandatory reporting of suspicious activities by healthcare providers. These state-level reforms complement federal legislation and create a comprehensive framework for protecting children from exploitation in medical research settings. The patchwork of protections that existed when Emma was victimized has been replaced by a robust system of safeguards. Emma's participation in bioethics committees at her school and in community organizations has given her practical experience in applying ethical principles to complex medical situations. Her insights into the patient perspective have been valued by adult committee members, and her ability to articulate the importance of trust in doctor-patient relationships has influenced policy discussions at both local and national levels. Her voice as a former victim-turned-advocate carries unique authority in these deliberations. The partnerships we've developed with pharmaceutical companies committed to ethical research practices have been crucial in preventing future exploitation while still allowing legitimate medical advancement to proceed. These companies have adopted enhanced oversight procedures for clinical trials and have committed to transparency in their financial relationships with physicians and research coordinators. The industry's recognition that ethical lapses ultimately harm everyone involved has created momentum for continued improvements in research practices. The educational programs we've developed for parents and caregivers have reached millions of families worldwide, providing practical guidance on recognizing potential signs of medical fraud and advocating effectively for their children's welfare. These programs emphasize the importance of seeking second opinions, asking detailed questions about treatment recommendations, and maintaining detailed records of all medical interactions. The empowerment of families to be informed advocates has been one of our most effective strategies for preventing exploitation. Emma's leadership in youth advocacy initiatives has inspired other young people who have been affected by medical trauma to find their voices and work for positive change. She mentors younger children who have experienced serious medical conditions, helping them understand that their experiences can become sources of strength and motivation for helping others. Her ability to transform personal trauma into a force for social good has impressed everyone who knows her story. The International Student Exchange Program we've established allows young advocates from different countries to learn from each other's experiences and share strategies for protecting vulnerable populations. Emma has hosted students from 6 different countries and has traveled to Europe and Asia to speak at youth advocacy conferences.
These international connections have broadened her perspective on global health issues and strengthened her commitment to pursuing a career that will allow her to help children worldwide. The technology sector's embrace of our fraud detection initiatives has led to the development of new tools that can identify patterns of exploitation in real time, allowing for immediate intervention before children are harmed. Several major tech companies have donated resources to our foundation and have committed to continuing development of these protective technologies. The collaboration between advocacy organizations and technology companies represents a new model for preventing systemic abuse. As Emma prepares to enter high school, she carries with her the knowledge that her infant suffering led to protections that have saved countless other children from similar exploitation. The foundation that bears her name has become a lasting monument to the power of turning personal tragedy into public good. Her story demonstrates that even the most vulnerable victims can become powerful advocates for justice when they receive proper support and have the courage to speak their truth. The congressional testimony I delivered last year resulted in additional funding for medical fraud investigation and prosecution, ensuring that law enforcement agencies have the resources necessary to pursue complex cases involving exploitation of vulnerable populations. The bipartisan support for these initiatives demonstrates that protecting children from medical fraud transcends political divisions and represents a fundamental moral imperative that unites people across ideological differences. Emma's vision for her future includes not only becoming a physician but also establishing a new model for pediatric practice that prioritizes transparency, ethics, and patient advocacy above all other considerations. She envisions medical centers where families are true partners in treatment decisions and where financial incentives never compromise clinical judgment. Her combination of personal experience, academic excellence, and moral clarity positions her to become a transformative leader in pediatric medicine. The legacy of our experience extends far beyond the specific reforms and protections that resulted from our advocacy efforts. Our story has become a symbol of the power of ordinary families to create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice and are willing to fight for what is right. Emma's transformation from victim to advocate demonstrates that even the most traumatic experiences can become sources of strength and motivation for protecting others from similar harm. 20 years later, Dr. Emma Martinez stands in the same hospital where she once lay as an infant, but now she wears the white coat of a pediatric cardiologist and carries the weight of protecting other vulnerable children from the exploitation she once suffered. The irony is not lost on anyone who knows her story. The baby who was nearly destroyed by medical fraud has become one of the most respected voices in pediatric ethics and patient advocacy. Her journey from victim to healer represents the ultimate triumph of hope over greed, trust over manipulation, and justice over corruption. The Children's Heart Institute that Emma founded 5 years ago has revolutionized pediatric cardiac care by implementing radical transparency measures that make exploitation virtually impossible. Every treatment recommendation comes with detailed explanations in plain language, independent second opinions are automatically provided for complex cases, and families have access to real-time financial disclosure showing any payments or incentives that might influence their child's care. The Institute's motto, Trust Through Transparency, reflects Emma's belief that the best way to prevent fraud is to eliminate the secrecy that allows it to flourish. Emma's medical training at Harvard was marked by academic excellence and unwavering commitment to ethical practice. Her professors still speak about the maturity and moral clarity she brought to complex ethical discussions, often citing personal experiences that most students could only imagine. Her residency at Boston Children's Hospital was distinguished by her ability to connect with families facing devastating diagnoses, drawing on her own experience as someone who had lived through the terror of believing a child was dying unnecessarily. The research Emma has conducted into the long-term psychological effects of medical fraud on families has become the gold standard in the field. Her groundbreaking study, which followed 200 families affected by research fraud over a 15-year period, documented the profound and lasting trauma experienced by both children and parents. The study's findings have influenced policy at the highest levels of government and have resulted in enhanced support services for victims of medical exploitation. Michael and I have watched with immense pride as Emma has transformed her childhood trauma into a force for protecting other children. The foundation we started in her name has now been integrated into her institute, creating a comprehensive approach to preventing medical fraud while providing cutting-edge cardiac care. The seamless integration of advocacy and medical practice represents a new model for pediatric healthcare that prioritizes patient welfare above all other considerations. The documentary series that Emma executive produced about medical fraud in pediatric settings has won multiple awards and has been credited with preventing numerous exploitation schemes from targeting vulnerable families. Her unique perspective as both a former victim and a practicing physician gives her unparalleled credibility when speaking about the need for reform. The series has been translated into dozens of languages and is now used in medical schools worldwide to teach students about the ethical responsibilities of treating children. Emma's marriage to Dr. David Kim, a pediatric surgeon she met during residency, has created a powerful partnership committed to ethical medical practice. David, who specializes in complex congenital heart repairs, shares Emma's commitment to transparency and patient advocacy. Together they have developed new protocols for informed consent that ensure families truly understand their options and are never pressured into unnecessary procedures. Their personal relationship has been strengthened by their shared professional values and commitment to protecting vulnerable patients. The technology platform that Emma's Institute developed for detecting potential research fraud has been adopted by hospitals and research institutions across 6 continents. The artificial intelligence system can analyze patterns in patient enrollment, treatment protocols, and financial relationships to identify suspicious activities before they harm children. The platform represents the marriage of cutting-edge technology with ethical medicine, creating safeguards that were unimaginable when Emma was victimized as an infant. Lisa's story took an unexpected turn during her final years in prison. After serving 12 years of her 15-year sentence, she was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer and spent her remaining time working in the prison's medical clinic, providing basic care to other inmates. Her death 3 years ago was marked by genuine expressions of remorse and letters to the families she had harmed, including a final letter to Emma asking for forgiveness and expressing pride in the woman Emma had become. The complexity of forgiveness and redemption that characterized Lisa's final years provided closure for many of her victims while demonstrating that even the most corrupt individuals can find their way back to humanity. The International Summit on Pediatric Medical Ethics that Emma hosts annually has become the premier gathering for professionals committed to protecting children from exploitation in healthcare settings. This year's summit attracted delegates from 87 countries, all working to implement the protocols and safeguards pioneered at Emma's Institute. The global reach of these reform efforts ensures that the lessons learned from Emma's experience continue to protect children regardless of where they receive medical care. Emma's twins, Sarah and Michael, named after their grandparents, are now 5 years old and display the same curiosity and compassion that have defined their mother's approach to life. They often accompany Emma to the hospital, where they've become unofficial ambassadors for the Institute's family-centered approach to care. Their presence reminds everyone that behind every patient is a family deserving of honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than exploitation and manipulation. The endowment that Emma established to fund ethical medical research has awarded over $50 million in grants to investigators committed to advancing pediatric care without compromising patient welfare. The funding comes with strict ethical requirements and oversight provisions that ensure research participants are truly informed partners rather than unwitting subjects. The endowment represents Emma's commitment to supporting legitimate medical advancement while preventing the kind of exploitation that marked her own early months. Dr. Chen, now in her 70s and serving as Emma's mentor emeritus, continues to marvel at the transformation of the terrified infant she once treated into a confident leader in pediatric medicine. Their relationship has evolved from doctor-patient to mentor-student to colleagues and friends, representing the best of what medicine can offer when practitioners are committed to their patients' welfare above all else. Dr. Chen's decision to challenge Lisa's fraudulent treatment plan 30 years ago has had ripple effects that continue to protect children worldwide. The memoir that Emma published about her journey from victim to advocate has become a bestseller and is required reading in medical ethics courses at universities around the world. The book's unflinching examination of how trust can be betrayed and rebuilt has resonated with readers far beyond the medical community, inspiring other survivors of institutional abuse to find their voices and work for systemic change. The book's success has provided additional funding for Emma's Institute while spreading awareness about the ongoing need for vigilance against medical exploitation. The policy changes that resulted from Emma's advocacy work have created a comprehensive framework for protecting pediatric patients that extends far beyond the United States. The Emma Martinez protocols, as they've become known internationally, require independent oversight for all pediatric research, mandatory financial disclosure for treating physicians, and enhanced penalties for those who exploit vulnerable children. These protocols have been adopted by medical institutions in over 40 countries, creating a global standard for ethical pediatric care. Emma's approach to patient care reflects her understanding that healing involves more than just medical intervention. It requires rebuilding trust that may have been damaged by previous experiences with healthcare systems. Her institute employs patient advocates who work specifically with families who have been traumatized by medical fraud or malpractice, helping them navigate the complex emotions involved in trusting healthcare providers again. This holistic approach to healing has become a model for trauma-informed medical care. The research fellowship program that Emma established has trained over 300 young physicians in ethical research practices and patient advocacy. These fellows, now practicing around the world, carry with them Emma's commitment to transparency and patient welfare, creating a new generation of healthcare providers who understand that trust is the foundation of effective medical care. The program's graduates have become leaders in their own right, spreading ethical practices throughout the medical community. The documentary about Emma's transformation from victim to advocate that premiered at the Cannes Film Festival last year has been acquired by streaming platforms worldwide and has sparked conversations about medical ethics in living rooms and classrooms across the globe. The film's portrayal of how individual courage can create systemic change has inspired viewer activism and has resulted in increased support for patient advocacy organizations. The documentary's success demonstrates the power of storytelling to create social change and protect vulnerable populations. Emma's vision for the future includes expanding her institute's model to other pediatric specialties, creating a comprehensive approach to ethical healthcare that protects children from exploitation while providing the best possible medical outcomes. She envisions a world where every sick child receives care from providers who are completely transparent about their motivations and free from conflicts of interest that might compromise clinical judgment. This vision drives her continued work and inspires the dedicated professionals who have joined her mission. The legacy of our family's experience extends far beyond the specific reforms and protections that resulted from our advocacy efforts. Emma's story has become a symbol of resilience and transformation, demonstrating that even the most traumatic experiences can become catalysts for positive change when survivors have the courage to speak truth to power. Her journey from exploited infant to respected physician represents the ultimate victory over those who would profit from human suffering. As Emma prepares for another day of protecting vulnerable children and supporting frightened families, she carries with her the knowledge that her infant's suffering was not meaningless but rather the foundation for a life dedicated to ensuring that no other child experiences the exploitation she endured. Her transformation from victim to victor, from patient to protector, from the exploited to the advocate represents the power of human resilience and the possibility of creating a more just and compassionate world through individual action and collective commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.